What if everyone called you crazy just because you believed in something that no one else saw? Donna Marietta, 65 years old, walked slowly down the dirt road, carrying on her face the same serene smile she had worn her whole life. But behind that smile was a woman who had accumulated decades of scars. People who laughed, people who whispered, people who preferred to mock her faith rather than try to understand. For many, she was just the old woman with exaggerated faith, the silent character in one of those moving stories that no one takes seriously. For others, she was the fanatic, the one who invents miracles, the one who lost her mind. Marietta heard everything. She always heard, but she never responded. Her faith was so great that it seemed to bother those who lived stuck on the ground. It was as if her whole life had been built to test the strength of a strong woman who, even living a humble life, never stopped believing in the impossible. At 20 years old, she made a promise she would carry forever. As long as I live, I will believe in what God shows me even if no one else believes. And she believed. She believed when her husband fell ill without hope. She believed when she lost everything she had. She believed when she was alone in the world. Her faith was the only thing that never abandoned her. But when she began to say that God had shown her a dream, a warning, a deliverance, something that could save the entire community, the judgment became even crueler. People who had never looked her in the eye began to laugh at her as if she were a character from invented real stories. Even the pastor asked her to tone it down, afraid of the gossip. Marietta simply took a deep breath and repeated, "I only say what God tells me to say." And then, in a stifling early morning, when the wind suddenly changed and a strange silence took over the community, something began to happen. Something that would transform that crazy old woman into the only voice that truly made sense. Something that would bring an unexpected twist, capable of moving the heart of even those who never believed in anything. That morning, those who mocked her discovered that faith is not delusion. It is strength. It is truth. It is destiny. And Marietta would finally be heard. Marietta's life has always been a mosaic of simplicity, faith, and silent losses, one of those real stories that few people know, but that carry a weight the world cannot imagine. From childhood, she learned that life would not be easy. She grew up in a small wooden house where the wind entered through the cracks and the food was only enough for the bare necessities. Her mother, Donna Ilda, was a firm woman of deep faith, who used to say, "Daughter, when the world turns its back on you, kneel, because God never does." These words shaped Marietta more than any school, more than any experience. They planted within her a sensitive, yet strong heart, a heart that believed in the invisible when the visible was too painful. It wasn't just faith. It was a kind of overcoming that came from the soul, as if life had taught her early on that strength isn't about shouting, but about persevering. In adolescence, while other girls dreamed of dresses and boyfriends, Marietta dreamed of peace. She dreamed of a tranquil home. She dreamed of days without shouting, without hunger, without fear. She found this dream when she met Joaquim, a simple, hard-working man who promised her a life of love and respect. And for a few years, the world truly seemed to smile. But fate, always unpredictable, exacted a high price for happiness. Joaquim fell ill with frightening speed. Doctors, exams, medicines, nothing helped. And Marietta, still young, found herself widowed, alone, holding on to what little remained of the life she had built with so much care. It was there, in that moment of greatest pain, that faith became her best friend, not because she chose it, but because it was the only thing she had. She clung to prayer like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of a stormy sea. She spent nights talking to God, asking for strength to go on. The community saw her as the woman who cries but doesn't break. Others already nicknamed her the pious one, the fanatic, the exaggerator, but no one knew the despair hidden in her heart, the silent struggle not to be swallowed by sadness. Over time, Marietta rebuilt her own life with dignity. She became that neighbor who helps, who prays for everyone, who gives what she doesn't have. Her humble life never bothered her. On the contrary, she knew that greatness isn't in the pocket, it's in the heart. But this same generosity began to awaken malicious comments. Some laughed at her, Others invented stories, saying that she invented miracles just to get attention. Marietta listened, lowered her eyes, and continued, because those who live by faith don't need to prove anything. And then, one night, she had such a vivid dream that she woke up with her heart racing. In the dream, she saw her community surrounded by something dark like a threat hovering in the air and heard a soft voice saying, "Warn them, deliverance will come." She awoke with a sense of urgency. She prayed, asked for clarity, asked for confirmation. And the more she prayed, the more she felt she needed to speak. It was as if the dream were a spiritual calling, a responsibility that could not be ignored. It was a task for someone with courage, and there was no greater courage than hers. But when she began to share the warning, laughter followed. Sideways glances, harsh words, hidden laughter, contempt. It was a classic scene of human drama. A woman of faith facing a crowd that only believes what it sees. They said she was making things up, that she was getting old, that she was losing her mind. People she had helped for years now mocked her mercilessly. Marietta felt her soul tighten, but she didn't give up. Something inside her told her that all of this had a purpose, that her spiritual journey was only beginning. And even without knowing it, in that phase of doubt and pain, she was already paving the way for an emotional upheaval so profound that it would change her community forever. The faith she had carried since childhood, that same faith that had saved her own life so many times, was about to show that no one is crazy for believing. Madness, in fact, is living without believing in anything. And the community that laughed at her would soon learn this lesson in a way they would never forget. Marietta's routine was as simple as it was sacred. Every day began the same way. Even before sunrise, she was already sitting on the edge of her bed, with her hands clasped and her eyes closed. She prayed softly, as if talking to an old friend. It was her way of giving thanks for her humble life, asking for protection for the community, and above all, renewing the faith that had always kept her standing. After the prayer, she lit a candle on the small improvised altar she had set up in the living room with a marked Bible, an old photo of her mother, and a handkerchief that belonged to her deceased husband. That wasn't superstition. It was memory. It was strength. It was a way of keeping alive the love that, even after so many losses, never ceased to exist. She drank black coffee, strong, almost bitter, the way she had learned to like it in her youth, when she needed to save sugar. After that, she would open the door and let the wind in. She would observe the still empty street, smelling the morning air. A simple ritual, but one that was, for her, a daily reminder that life went on. Throughout the day, she divided her time between household chores, small services she did for neighbors, and moments of community service. She brought soup to the elderly, cared for children, shopped for those who couldn't go out, and offered an ear to those who needed to vent. The community never realized it, but she was the invisible thread that connected many lives there. And yet, she was treated as a stranger. Over time, her overly strong faith, her excessive kindness, and her always overly serene gaze began to bother some. Some people said she was fanaticistic, others said she exaggerated, and some, more cruel, claimed she was an old woman who invented miracles to feel important. Marietta listened. She didn't argue back. She kept the pain in her chest. It was a silent kind of pain, the kind that hurts without making a sound. When she went to church, she always sat on the same pew, the last one, in the left corner, so as not to bother anyone. Some women avoided passing near her. Others whispered, "Here comes the crazy dreamer. She thinks she's chosen. She's always talking to God, but she doesn't really talk to anyone." She heard everything, every word, every whisper, every stifled laugh, but she kept going, because her faith didn't depend on applause. It depended only on God. And it was on one of those ordinary days, one of those when she humbly performed her small tasks, that the real conflict began. Marietta felt something different in her heart, a strong intuition, like a tightness not of fear, but of warning. She prayed more than usual that day. She asked for light. She asked for clarity, but the answer didn't come immediately. On her way to the fair, she noticed some people laughing at her behind her back. A group of young people imitated her way of walking, exaggerating her hunched posture, making fun of how she carried her bag. With each laugh, her chest felt heavier. A neighbor commented loudly, "If this woman were normal, she would have stopped with these vision stories. Does she think God only sends messages to her?" And yet, she didn't retaliate. She only smiled kindly, as she always did. But inside, her heart was weary. When she returned home, she felt the dream from the previous night burning within her. That dream that left her restless, as if she were holding a secret she couldn't keep. It wasn't an ordinary dream. It was a warning, a vision, a message she couldn't ignore, not if she wanted to live in peace with her own conscience. She took a deep breath and decided she needed to warn people. She needed to alert the community. It didn't matter the cost. It didn't matter what they would say. It was her spiritual journey in motion, and abandoning it would be the same as abandoning herself. But when she started talking, everything fell apart. First came the giggles, then the ironic glances, then the venomous comments. There, the madness has started again. That old woman needs a doctor, not faith. She'll end up scaring the children with those stories. Marietta took a deep breath. She tried to explain. She tried to be clear. She said it wasn't made up, that it wasn't drama, that it was just a warning, a request from heaven for everyone to be vigilant. But none of that mattered. People continued to mock her, as they always do when they don't understand what's different, or when they don't want to believe in anything they can't measure, touch, or control. And so it was, on that simple day, full of small pains and great omens, that the path began that would lead Marietta from ridicule to respect. She didn't know it yet. They didn't know it either. But life was about to turn upside down, and everyone there would learn that unwavering faith isn't madness. It's courage. Marietta's warning quickly spread throughout the community. It only took a few hours. A misinterpreted phrase here, a laugh there, a malicious whisper at the market. And that was it. What she had said had become a distorted, exaggerated, ridiculed story. The news spread quickly, but not with the care of someone who wants to understand, but rather with the venomous pleasure of someone who loves to mock. "Here she comes with those crazy visions again," said a woman while arranging fruit on her market stall. "She must be wanting attention. Poor thing. She's getting old," replied another. Marietta listened to everything with her head down. The silent pain she carried felt like a stone embedded in her chest. Even so, she remained firm because her unwavering faith didn't depend on anyone's approval. That same afternoon, the church would hold a special meeting open to the entire community. The pastor would announce a new social project, and as always, the hall would be packed. Marietta decided to go, not to defend herself, but because she believed she should try, once again, to warn people about what she felt in the dream. It was difficult to explain. It was something that couldn't be put into words. A profound feeling, a calling, something she interpreted as a divine message. And even though they mocked her, she couldn't keep it to herself. When she arrived at the church, she saw the hall full, children running around, men talking, women arranging chairs. That environment, which had once been a source of comfort, now seemed like an audience ready to judge her. As soon as she entered, some whispered, "Look, the visionary has arrived. Now the service will turn into a soap opera. I wonder if she'll be talking to angels or aliens today." Laughter followed soon after. Marietta took a deep breath, maintained her composure, and went to her pew, the same one as always, in the left corner. She sat down slowly, resting her trembling hands on her lap. She had never been afraid of being called old. What hurt was seeing her faith treated as a joke. When the pastor began the service, everything seemed normal. He spoke about solidarity, about helping the poorest families, about hope. Marietta tried to pay attention, but the dream still throbbed within her, as if an invisible reminder repeated the same phrase in her mind. "Speak. They need to hear." Then, when the pastor opened the floor for testimonies and prayer requests, she stood up, slowly, carefully, courageously. The hall fell silent for a second, not out of respect, but out of cruel curiosity. Marietta took a deep breath, clutched her handkerchief, and began to speak. "Brothers and sisters, I had a dream. Not an ordinary dream. It was a warning. Something important is coming. We need to pray and be vigilant." As soon as she finished the first sentence, she heard a muffled giggle in the back, another in the middle of the line, a third near the door. People tried to disguise it, But they couldn't. Marietta continued. It's not a joke. I'm not making anything up. I felt in my heart that something big is going to happen. God showed me that we must be vigilant, protect our homes. A man interrupted, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Oh, for God's sake, Mrs. Marietta. The lady keeps having visions. Every month there's a new warning. Laughter erupted. Marietta's face burned. She held back tears. A young woman from the church, known for her arrogant manner, crossed her arms and said, "You need a doctor, not a microphone. This isn't faith. This is delusion." The ground seemed to tremble. The public humiliation came like a storm. Marietta tried to breathe and stay strong, but the cruelty didn't stop. "Sit down, Mrs. Marietta," someone said. "We came for a serious meeting, not to hear old wives' tales," another mocked. Collective laughter filled the church as if it were applause for prejudice. The pastor, visibly uncomfortable, walked over to her. He placed his hand on her shoulder, not in support, but as if apologizing for the embarrassment. "Sister Marietta, perhaps it would be better if we talked privately later. People are confusing things. To avoid more gossip, perhaps it would be good if you kept this to yourself for now." To avoid gossip. That was it. That was how they summed up their pain, their faith, their sincere warning. Marietta swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and lowered her head. She didn't answer. She didn't retort. She simply returned to her pew, with short, silent steps. Inside her, a huge battle raged. Doubt, pain, shame, but, above all, an absolute certainty. "I know what I heard. God doesn't lie." While everyone continued the meeting as if nothing had happened, while people resumed their conversations and smiles, something inside Marietta closed. It was as if the door of trust had been locked. And there, on that simple pew at the back of the church, the beginning of the community's great spiritual upheaval was born, though no one imagined it. Because the woman they called crazy would be the only one who, in a few days, would know exactly what to do. After the public humiliation, Marietta walked home slowly, as if each step weighed twice as much. The night was silent, but inside there was an impossible noise to silence, a knot of sadness, shame, and indignation that tightened around her chest as if by invisible hands. She had always believed that faith would sustain her through difficult times, but she never imagined that it would be her own community, the people she had helped for years, that would bring her down so harshly. She felt small, invisible, discarded, as if the simple faith that had guided her entire life had been transformed into a source of mockery. Upon entering her house, she closed the door carefully, as if the sound might give her away to someone. She leaned against the wall, slid down to sit on the floor, and let the tears fall. It wasn't just sadness. It was the feeling of having been broken inside, of having her spirituality trampled before those who should have embraced her. "Am I really going crazy?" she murmured, her voice trembling. And immediately, as a reflex of her heart, she shook her head. No, that wasn't it. She knew what she had felt. She knew what she had heard. She knew the weight of that dream. She knew it wasn't made up, it was a warning. But even with that certainty, the pain of the unjust judgment cut like a sharp knife. Suffering because of life was different. This was suffering for having faith, for believing, for wanting to protect. And nobody understood. Marietta spent the following days withdrawn, speaking little even to herself. When she went to the window, she saw people talking in the street, laughing, going about their lives as if nothing had happened. But she knew the story was spreading. The old woman who claimed to have visions, the church fanatic, the woman who needed a doctor. Every whisper that reached her ears hurt like an open wound. "I just wanted to help," she said, her voice almost non-existent. The pain in her soul, however, did not lessen. In the following days, she avoided the church. She avoided the market. She avoided any place where she might hear gossip. Instead, she isolated herself at home, alone with her memories and prayers. There, kneeling beside her bed, she searched for strength that seemed to have vanished. "My God, if I was wrong to speak, forgive me," she said, weeping. "But if the warning was true, don't let me be silent out of fear." It was a sincere prayer, without embellishment, without demands. The prayer of a woman who carried a broken heart, but didn't want to lose the essence that had always moved her. The days dragged on as if they would never end. And the more Marietta remained silent, the more the community forgot the warning. Not because they stopped mocking, but simply because they didn't believe anything would happen. The pastor, although regretful for how he interrupted her, didn't seek her out. He was afraid to reopen the subject and cause more gossip. He preferred silence, and that silence hurt more than harsh words. Marietta then began to doubt not her faith, but herself. Should I have kept the dream to myself? Did I speak too soon? Did I misinterpret? These questions haunted her for entire nights. Nights when she slept little and prayed much. Nights when she tried to remember the details of the dream, the sensations, the warmth in her chest, the soft voice that seemed more real than life itself. Then, one of those early mornings, while the wind rustled against the windows, something inside her changed. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a sign. It was simply peace, a profound peace, as if God had placed a warm blanket over her heart. She took a deep breath and realized she didn't need to convince anyone. Truth doesn't depend on applause, and the warning, if it was real, would come true regardless of what they thought. And it was there, on her knees, that she made a silent decision. If no one believed her, that was fine. She would continue praying. She would continue asking for protection for the community, even if she was ridiculed, even if no one ever knew how much she suffered. Because miracles, she thought, don't need an audience. They only need faith. Little did she know that, in a few days, everyone in that community would rush to remember her, that her name would echo among the houses, that even those who called her crazy would seek refuge in her words. And the woman who cried alone in her room was about to become the only voice of hope when the impossible happened. The dawn began like any other. Silent, cold, laden with a strange wind that seemed to announce something. Marietta was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped. She had tried to sleep, but the restlessness in her chest wouldn't let her. Outside, a heavy cloud covered the sky. The air was dense, almost still, the kind of night that makes even the animals hide. She closed her eyes and repeated the prayers she already knew by heart. Lord, protect every house on the street. Protect every family, even those who don't believe in your hand. Her heart beat slowly, but firmly, a serene faith, even after so much humiliation. But then, something happened. First was a distant noise, like muffled thunder. Then another, and another. The sound was approaching, not like rain, but like something heavy coming from afar. Marietta got up and went to the window. The street was empty. The streetlights flickered. The wind carried a strange smell of dust and earth. That's when she saw it. An intense light streaked across the horizon, followed by a deep rumble. The earth trembled. The houses vibrated as if the ground suddenly breathed. The dogs began to bark frantically. Windows banged. Doors opened. The entire community woke up startled. My God, what is that? Someone shouted. Marietta just closed her eyes. She knew it wasn't a punishment. It wasn't the end of the world. It was a deliverance, exactly as she had seen in the dream. Suddenly, a huge explosion lit up the sky on the opposite side of the city. Not a cinematic explosion, but a real, painful one. The rupture of an old water main that had needed maintenance for years. The corroded pipe burst with enough force to sweep away cars, knock down walls, and flood entire neighborhoods. The water rushed down like an uncontrolled torrent, carrying everything in its path. People running, screams, cars floating, houses flooded in seconds. Chaos took over. The news spread as fast as the water main burst. The water is flowing towards the center. Those who live near the old factory are in danger. But Marietta's community was safe. A natural curve in the terrain prevented the flood from advancing in that direction. A minimal, almost imperceptible detour created by an old tree whose roots had raised the soil over the years. It seemed like a coincidence, but those who were seeing it with their own eyes knew it wasn't. The water devastated everything around it, except her neighborhood, except the houses she prayed for, except the lives she asked for protection. People went into the street, frightened and emotional. My God, it didn't reach here. It went straight past. How is this possible? It was supposed to come here. This doesn't make sense. But it did. It made sense to Marietta. While everyone shouted, she remained near the door, hugging her shawl, silent tears streaming down her face. A mixture of gratitude and confirmation. It was then that the neighbor, the same one who had laughed at her, ran to her house in tears. Mrs. Marietta, did you see? Did you see? The water didn't come in here. What you said. My God, it was true. Others approached, first timidly, then desperately, then repentantly. The pastor came running, without his hat, his shirt untucked. They had never seen that man so shaken. He stopped before her, breathless, sweating, and asked, Sister Marietta, did you know? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, at the neighbors, at the whole street that now seemed small in the face of the magnitude of what had happened. And only then did she say, in the calm voice of someone who carries true faith, I only repeated what God placed in my heart. The silence that fell was not one of fear. It was one of reverence. That woman, called crazy, exaggerated, fanatical, delusional, was at that moment the only person who made sense to everyone, the only one who had spoken the truth, the only one who had seen it before, the only one who remained firm when everyone doubted. The pastor moved, held her hands. I ask your forgiveness. In front of everyone. I didn't listen. I doubted. Neighbors gathered. People cried. Others hugged her. A young woman, the same one who had said she needed a doctor, fell to her knees in front of her, sobbing. Forgive me. I didn't know. Marietta tenderly stroked her hair. You don't need to ask forgiveness from me, my daughter. Ask God to guide your eyes. Because she held no grudge. Her faith was never about pride, nor about being right, nor about being superior. Her faith was about care, protection, love for others, even when those others didn't deserve it. That dawn changed everything. The community would never be the same again, and Marietta wouldn't either. Finally, as the sun rose and tinged the sky with a soft light, she murmured softly, as if speaking only to God, Thank you for not letting me fall into the silence of fear. And the first ray of light illuminated her face, the woman they called crazy, but who saved an entire community with a faith that didn't need to be understood to be true. After that dawn that changed everyone's destiny, the community awoke differently. There was no longer the noise of mockery in the alleys, nor the hidden laughter that once wounded Marietta's heart. What could be heard now were hurried footsteps, emotional voices, and a kind of respect that is not born of obligation, but of recognition. People walked down the street with a different posture, as if the fear of tragedy and the miracle of deliverance had ripped away layers of pride and revealed to everyone a simple truth. The faith they laughed at was the same faith that saved each of them. Early in the morning, neighbors began to gather near Marietta's house. Some brought flowers, others only the weight of shame etched on their faces. She came out slowly, holding her woolen shawl over her shoulders. The sun touched her face gently, as if blessing that woman who had withstood the judgment of the whole world. The pastor approached first. Unlike the firm man who preached from the pulpit, now he seemed small not in stature, but in humility. Sister Marietta, he said, his voice trembling, I said things I shouldn't have, and I remained silent when I should have listened. Will you forgive me? She smiled delicately, that smile that only those who carry true faith are capable of offering. Pastor, forgiveness is lighter than pride. If I don't forgive, it weighs on me, she replied serenely. I already absolved you the very night you hurt me. The man began to cry, and Marietta hugged him like a mother hugs a repentant child. Soon after, the neighbors who had laughed at her in the street arrived. The young woman who said she needed a doctor, the young man who imitated her prayer gesture, the woman who turned her back while she spoke of the dream. They all approached with teary eyes and nervous hands, as if asking for something they believe they don't deserve. We made a mistake, said the older neighbor, her voice faltering. I treated you as if your faith were weakness, but today I understand it was strength. You saved us. Marietta placed her hand on hers, squeezing lightly. God is the one who saves my daughter. I was only his mouthpiece at that moment. There was no pride in that answer. There was only truth. Gradually, the entire community gathered around her, not as an audience, but as family. And there, in front of everyone, Marietta realized something she hadn't expected. The humiliation of the last few months had transformed into respect. The loneliness that consumed her now gave way to a sincere presence, and the silence that hurt was now filled with words of gratitude. And despite all the recognition she received, Marietta didn't allow it to go to her heart. She wasn't seeking human glory. She was seeking meaning, and now she had it. In the days that followed, the change was visible. The community began to gather more. People started praying together. The pastor invited Marietta to help with the new spiritual coordination, not as an authority, but as a counselor. "I don't have the education for these things," she would say, laughing lightly. "But you have wisdom, don't Marietta," he would reply, "and that can't be learned in any book." Neighbors knocked on her door asking for prayers for their children. Men who had previously avoided her now greeted her with respect. Children began calling her Grandma of Faith. Marietta received each gesture with her usual humility. But what surprised her most was seeing the inner transformation of the people. Some began to seek out those they had offended throughout their lives. Others started helping neighbors without expecting anything in return. The faith that Marietta carried, that silent, simple, firm faith, spread like a sweet perfume throughout the entire community. One afternoon, while she was watering her plants, the pastor approached and said, "Did you realize that everything changed because of your courage?" She smiled and replied with the sweetness that defined her, "It wasn't courage, Pastor. It was obedience. Faith is like that. You just take the step, and God decides the path." And at that moment, she felt that the wound that the humiliation had left had finally healed, not with revenge, not with applause, but with peace. The peace of someone who does what is right. The peace of someone who doesn't need to convince anyone to be heard by God. The peace of someone who sees the divine hand transform pain into purpose. As night fell, she sat on the porch and watched the lights of the houses turning on one by one. It was then that she thought, "I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted them to remember that God still speaks, and that we just need to have the courage to listen." And for the first time in a long time, she felt her heart lighten, because she finally understood that believing wasn't madness. It was faith. And faith, when it's alive, illuminates the path even for those who never believed in it. There are stories born from suffering. There are stories born from courage. And there are stories like Donna Marietta's, born from a faith that no one understands, but that one day everyone recognizes. She was called exaggerated. She was ridiculed, discredited, silenced. She carried the weight of an entire community's judgment on her fragile but unwavering shoulders. And even when spiritual solitude almost brought her down, she continued to believe. Because true faith doesn't depend on applause to exist. It grows in the dark. It flourishes in silence. And it sustains those who choose to trust, even when nothing makes sense. The deliverance that morning not only proved Marietta was right, but also proved that faith, when sincere, is never madness. Madness is living without believing in anything. Madness is mocking what one doesn't understand. Madness is turning one's back on God and thinking there are no consequences. The community that once laughed at her now knows there are people who see first, feel first, and hear first. And often, it is precisely these people, the humblest, the simplest, the most silent, who carry miracles within their hearts. Marietta's story is a powerful reminder. The faith that moves mountains must first move our hearts. And when it moves, nothing remains the same. How many women like her have been discredited? How many mothers, grandmothers, aunts, strong women have been called crazy simply because they believe in something greater? How many have felt the weight of judgment, but remained steadfast because they knew that God saw what no one else saw? This story is for them, for all the women of silent faith who carry the world without asking for anything in return, for those who don't need to prove anything to anyone, for those who know that time and God always reveal the truth. Final reflection: faith doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need to be understood. It doesn't need to be applauded. It only needs to be lived. And whoever laughs at faith today, tomorrow may be saved by it. If this story touched your heart, if you have experienced something similar, or if you know someone like Donna Marietta, comment, like, and follow the channel. Here, you're a part of a community of strong women who overcome pain, injustice, and challenges together. Every day we tell real stories, stories that move, stories that uplift. Because faith may be invisible to the eyes, but it never goes unnoticed by those who need it.